So tonight we will continue, as Thelma said, the study of the book Good News by Humberto de Campos and Francisco Cândido Xavier. I went ahead and studied a little bit to facilitate the study tonight, but this is much more of a conversation. So feel free to ask questions, to interrupt. You don't need to wait until the end to do that. But at the end we will have a Q&A, as we usually do. Chapter 13, let's see what we have to say about sin and punishment. So today we will study basically two passages of the gospel, right? So John chapter 8, verse 3 and chapter 5 as well. So let's start, and we will go reading and commenting after each passage. So we will not read everything and comment after. I try to bring the most of the good news because Humberto de Campos brings a lot of new details from what's on the gospel. A few times I also bring some other pieces of the gospel that I think that also help us to understand better. And I will need a lot of volunteers to read because I brought most of the chapter here. So who wants to start? Want to go, Akil? Yeah.
Woman taken in adultery. Jesus had finished one of his preachings in the public square when he realized that the crowd was in an uproar. Some more exalted people burst out into screams while a breathless woman with disheveled hair and gaunt face approached him, pleading for protection from the corner of her sack. The many Jews crowded and aroused the general mood, demanding the stoning of the sinner in conformity with the ancient traditions. Jesus was then asked to judge the customs of the people. The master exclaimed with serenity and fearlessness, causing astonishment to those who heard him. He who is without sin cast the first stone.
Thank you. So that's a very well-known passage on the gospel, right? I think every one of us heard it at some point in our lives. Most of us studied, so you can add things that you want. But we'll try to bring a lot of the Spiritism teachings with that today as well. So let's start. That's a very important point here is that this was not a conversation with Jesus, right? It was not, hey, Jesus, what do you think about this? Like we discovered that woman was in adultery. No, they came to Jesus and trying to trick him. So at this time already, some of the judges of the law, they were already against Jesus, right? So they wanted to get him. So because Jesus was bringing a new movement that was bringing a lot of word of love and changing some of the customs of the time and challenging these customs. So they were trying to get to him and trying to break him somehow, right? And with that question, is not like, what's your opinion about this? Is how do you see, how do you judge, how do you react to the customs of the time, right? And here Jesus had more or less like two options. That's how I read this very tricky question, right? So he could have said, let's stone her, like follow the customs and break one of the 10 commandments, which is do not kill, right? Or he could have said, yeah, now you're all wrong. Moses is wrong, or your customs are wrong. The way you read the law is wrong. So the Synedrium is wrong. Everything is wrong, right? And we should not stone her. Let's see how Jesus reacts to that. Can you read a little more?
An unsettling shock was felt by the whole assembly. The accusations were silenced in the most exalted lips. The crowd was introspective and attempting to interpret their own situation. Meanwhile, the master began to write on the ground without any concern. Gradually, the place became almost deserted. Only Jesus and some disciples remained there, with the woman beside them concealing her face with her hands. At a given moment, the divine master raised his brow and asked the unhappy one, "Woman, where are your judges?"
Okay, so there's something really important here. I think that in life, a lot of times we are asked questions or are just demanded from us that we behave in a certain way or that we either follow the thing, right? And a lot of times we see just like only two options, as I described before, but Jesus brings another one. He asks a question and doesn't do anything. So he's teaching us here also not by omission, but by deciding not to follow the inputs that he received, right? And he directed his question to the crowd. That's very interesting as well, because when they get and bring that woman and start questioning him, they're not behaving as individuals, they're behaving as a crowd. So it's like if everyone comes here and asks me a question and one asks something and the other one reverberates and say the same thing again in a very aggressive way, it's not that I'm dealing with each one of you. I'm dealing with a crowd. I'm dealing with another entity here that's not each one of them. And when Jesus asked that question about the one that's without sin cast the first stone, he points that question to each individual there and breaks that crowd, breaks that, right? So what can you see? He writes on the ground, so he doesn't take a direct action, and then he asks that question. And what we see also on the gospel, on John 8:9, is that, and they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even unto the last. And John brings even like another detail here, another shade. That's the older people, they retire themselves first. So they knew that they had mistakes in their lives. They had their own, they had the conscience of that. They knew that there are things that they wanted to do better, right? There are things that maybe there was nothing wrong that happened, but they knew they could do better. And at the end of their life, it was easier for them to look back without so much proudness, without so much pride, without so much desire to say that they are the best, without these masks, and being able to take that and then retire themselves. And after that, the youngers, then they retire themselves also, because we need to remember something here. We live in a world that has a lot of masks, that there's a lot of image, and our public image is very important, right? So Daniel is very calm in the center, but how is he for real, inside himself? How does he deal with that when he's alone, when he's with his family and all of these things in an intimate environment? So if today that's a question we ask ourselves, how should I behave now? I'm at the center, I'm at work, and all of these things. Imagine at the time that they lived in a much more rudimentary, much more intimate relationship with everyone in their tribes, right? And then Jesus asks her, go back to the woman now and ask her, where are your judges? And another thing that we should think about here, we are talking about Jesus, which is a man that could walk on water, that could transform water into wine, that multiplied food, right? So he could very easily just have made a miracle here in the sense of the physical aspect of it. He could just have used like the Harry Potter cloak of invisibility and disappeared with the woman, could have transformed the stones into sand, could have done a lot of things to change the physical aspects of the situation. But he didn't do that. He went to each one of us to teach us a lesson here, a very specific and direct lesson, right? And for us to think a little bit also about this question, because it's not like if any one of us come to a crowd and ask such a question and try to place that, it's not that do, but it's something difficult to do. Because Jesus here was the virtue itself, right? So Jesus was the voice of God, was the speech in this sense. And he lived everything that he was saying. He was a pure spirit, as we know. So it's different by his moral situation than ours. That's also another aspect. And just so we can think a little bit about that, I was trying to relate that to our day-to-day lives, right? Imagine someone that we respect a lot, someone that knows us very well and knows us to the point that they can read us, right? So they to us and see if we are lying or not and these kind of things. Or someone that we don't want to lie to because we really respect that person and we think that that would be really wrong for some reason. So that could be like a spouse, a friend, parents, grandparents, anyone. Just think about that person now. So that's a similar feeling that probably these people felt at the time. So someone that knew them, that could read them as an open book, right? And just to give an example of that, in the book 2,000 years ago, when Emmanuel, at the time Publius Lentulus, he met Jesus, and Jesus just looked at him. He couldn't even react. He couldn't like keep his pride at the moment, because he was really prideful at the moment, right, in this incarnation. He knew that he was doing something wrong by his conscience, but he kept doing these things. He was very, he was very hard in the sense that being protecting himself from the truth, right? And when he meets Jesus at that moment, at the very moment, he just knees and cries. Action. So that's the power of the man that we're talking here, right? So Jesus had this magnetic presence, this loving presence, but also this truthful, like seeing presence, right? So it was very difficult to lie to him in this sense. And he put them to think about themselves. Can you continue? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Noting that the sinner answered him with a gaze of appreciation, tears mixed with joy, Jesus then continued, "Has no one condemned you? Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." The unfortunate woman withdrew, experiencing a new sensation in her spirit. The generosity of the Messiah illuminated her heart in vivid rays of light that bathed her entire soul.
Thank you. So what can we see here? A very interesting point is that he says, "Neither do I condemn you." And that teaches a very strong lesson here. So if you go to the Spiritist book on the Spirit's classification, right, in question 97, the degrees of purification, you see that one way of seeing the spirits and one way of Spiritism, that's the one we use that Kardec classify, is classify the spirits in three groups: imperfect, good, and pure. And on the imperfect spirits, there's a prevalence of evil over good. So they do more things that are evil than good, either because they want or because they cannot control themselves, or because they don't know, right? Then there's the good spirits, which are the ones that do more good than evil. So sometimes they still get things wrong, so they have mistakes, they are still under the influence of matter. However, they want to do good, right? And that's the overall difference here. And then there are the pure spirits, the ones that reach at the utmost level of refinement. So they are the most intelligent and also the most evolved in the intelligent and in the moral aspects, right? And Jesus is an example of a pure spirit. So the best example we have of a pure spirit, right? And the lesson that he teaches us here is that to evolve, we will not evolve just with the intellectual side, just condemning people, just pointing fingers and doing these things. We will evolve by love. And loving is not about pointing the other one's mistakes. It's about trying to help others to grow. And that's what he did here. In addition, when Jesus is talking about adultery, there's a passage of the Gospel on chapter 8, item 5, from "Blessed are the pure of heart." And Jesus usually employed adultery also in other passages on the Gospel, not talking only about the sexual aspect of adultery, but talking about any time that we deviate from the God's ways, right? So from the everything, every evil action would be an adultery sense, because we are breaking that relationship with God. That's the idea. So we need to think about everything here, not only adultery. Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
While the sinner left filled with intense joy, the few disciples who were with the Lord could not hide the awkwardness that his gesture had caused them. Why did he not condemn that woman whose life was objectionable to the eyes of everyone? Was she not an adulterer? Meanwhile, John approached and interrogated him. "Master, why did you condemn the harlot who has led such an infamous life?"
And I think that it's a question that we would ask, right, if we were there, or when today we see someone and think, "Oh, that person is going unpunished, that is going like, is getting out of the situation." And that was kind of the reaction there from John, right? And we need to remember that, and when he asks, he goes to, "Why did you not condemn?" Right? So the disciples, they were not pure spirits, as we know. So they were, of course, prepared for that incarnation. We know in Spiritism that we are prepared for our incarnations to overcome our challenges and our difficulties. either from a mission perspective or for an expiation in our world, but they were not pure spirits. They were almost like us, right? So everyone here is on the same level, and they were like just better students from the same class. So they didn't understand everything. And what we will see that's very nice is that although when talking to the crowds, Jesus spoke in parables, he used examples and things to facilitate for everyone to understand. To his disciples, he spoke in clearly. So he gave clear examples, he went straight to the point, as we'll see now.
Look, then retorted, "What reasons do you claim to hold such a conviction? Do you know why that poor woman played the harlot? Have you ever suffered the harshness of the vicissitudes that she went through in her life? You ignore her major needs, temptations that made her succumb halfway. You do not know how many times she has been the object of scorn by her parents, her children, and siblings of joyous women. It would not be fair to aggravate the hellish sufferings of her sorrowful and aimless conscience."
Thank you. And in this conversation, Humberto de Campos is bringing more information from what we see on the gospel. That's why I added this continuation on the top, because it's not from what we find in the gospel, right? But it's nice to see that conversation from Jesus with the disciples, in which he's bringing new information for them, right? So the first question is, do you know why? And I'm not going to go yet into the merit of judgment, although we know that that's not the way to go. But it's very interesting that we humans, reincarnate beings, right? We are very restricted by our senses. So what we can touch, what we can hear, what we can see. And for that reason, our spectrum of understanding of the world is very, very limited. It's very limited to the present also. And when we see something happen, we have no idea what's the background from it. We don't know what's going on with that person, what sufferings they have, what led them to these situations. And going back to the point of the incarnation, we all have our difficulties to overcome in our lives, right? Nothing for any one of us is very easy in the whole life. Because if something is going easy now, it's because it's a moment of preparation for us to later on find challenge that we will need to overcome, and we can overcome, as we'll see later. So another thing is that Jesus puts her as a poor woman, right? And asks him if he knows what's going on with her. Because what really happens is that that woman was suffering already. She was already having a life that she was not understood by her family, that she was rejected by society, that she was feeling less than other people that maybe had a stable relationship or something else. And each one of us carry our own sufferings. So it adds nothing when we just point fingers to people and judge them, because that's not going to ease their suffering. It's not going to help them to improve or anything of this. We'll talk about like possibilities here, but let's just keep going for now. Someone else wants to read, just to give a break to Akil?
I can read.
Okay, thanks.
However, explained John, defending the principles of the old law. She sinned and lived up to the punishment. Is it not written that people shall pay penny by penny for their mistakes?
And here again, he read the teachings, he knew what he was talking about, but was not enough when Jesus answered the first time, right? And I take that to us. So how many times do we read the gospel, or just using the gospel, but like any moral books, and we read it, and we go back and do the same, and read it, and we go back and do the same, and we read it, and go back and do the same. Either because we don't understand, read it again, and didn't click yet, right? We didn't really understand it. We didn't feel it in our lives, in our skin, because that's when we learn. Or because we still can't, as Paul said. So the good that I want to do, I don't do. But the evil that I don't want to do, this I do, right? So let's see how Jesus answered that.
The master smiled, perturbed, and explained, "No one can deny that she sinned. Who will be substituted their souls for lower prices. However, I have not seen their accusers. Hypocrisy is punished, while stones are thrown at scoffers.
Right. And something else that we need to remember here is that going back to the point of the penny by penny, take the example of like when we take a loan, right? Let's say we take a loan, we want to pay that in 5 years. Something happens in our life, the plan doesn't go as expected, and we go back to the bank and we try to refinance that. Probably some more interest that we need to pay or something like that, but we can't do it. It's an opportunity that we receive, right? So how God, that's all merciful and just, how loving and just, could not give us another opportunity, while us that are imperfect beings, we can already see these things, right? So when we say that it's going to be paid penny by penny, it's not that the person didn't go do something wrong and not need to recover that. But the recovering is not immediate, and sometimes we don't see how the recovery really happens. In one life, right? But going back here, that's exactly what Jesus said, right? So it's not that she didn't do something wrong; she did something wrong, but Jesus didn't judge, didn't work on the. Jesus didn't judge the sinner, but the sin itself. So the act was wrong. Okay, go and don't do it anymore. But the person one day will be much better, and he saw that already in each one that he tried, right? Another point here that he brings is that a lot of times what we see is that someone that's suffering already, as he points out, because everyone is seeing that, it's clear to everyone, that person will make them suffer more. But a lot of times, there are people that still wear their masks and they wear them well. And for that reason, it's not open to everyone to see, right? But it's very common that either because the people want to do something, either in return, like vengeance, or for something happened, like Monica did something to me, I want to do something to her, but I didn't have the opportunity to do that yet, but I want to do that, right? Or because I did and no one discovered. So that's the point that he's bringing here, that we also need to consider that. And a lot of times these people are, in humanity, unpunished, right? Undiscovered and unpunished. But on the eyes of God, that doesn't exist.
John, the world is full of whitewashed homes, but God is the Father of infinite goodness that awaits the prodigal children of his home. Could there be for the humble sinner greater torment than that to which she has condemned herself indefinitely? Each one carries the sacred spark of the Creator and erects within himself or herself the shrine of his presence or the bleak wall of denial. But light and good are eternal, and one day all strongholds of evil will fall, so that God may shine in the spirit of his truth.
Thank you. So let's explore a little more. And just a detail, right? So the whitewashed homes here is that idea of on the exterior, they look nice, or they are in one way, and internally they are different. That was at the time that the Jews did related to the rites of purification. So the pilgrims would not go near the dead, because then they would be deemed impure and they would not be able to participate in the rituals of the time. Okay, I'll not go into more details, but just wanted to bring that because for me it was something that I discovered as well studying this. But when Jesus say condemned herself indefinitely, I think that what we need to remember here is that we see the period of incarnation, right? But what we know in Spiritism is that after death, the spirit also suffer from the consequence of what they did in life. So in the book, not for example, we have André Luiz discarnating, and even though he didn't know that he was doing anything like so bad or so wrong, he passed some years in umbral suffering still from the place that his conscience put himself on, right? Until he was rescued. So we don't know for how long after the physical suffering and the situations that we go on life, anyone will still go related to still from the mistakes they make, right? And another thing is that for anyone can be in any place, physical place. So we could be here at the center, but we have so much anxiety for something that's going on with our work, with our life. We regret something that we did, an argument maybe with a family member or something. So at the same place we could be on a party or anywhere. So the physical place and the external situation is doesn't mean that internally they are good, that they are happy, that they are in peace, right? And that's the other aspect that we need to remember here.
That's why we do not condemn the sinner to eliminate sin. And in all circumstances, I always prefer to believe in the good. John, when you see the saddest and most miserable beings crawling on a night road with shadows and desolation, remember the core seed that contains a divine germ that one day will rise from the bottom of the earth to receive a luminous kiss from the sun. After the explanation of the Master, the son of Zebedee showed his deep admiration for the Master through his lucid gaze. He then began to meditate on the teachings received.
I think that is very nice that after Jesus answered like twice or three times, then he got what Jesus was talking about and said, okay, so let me think about that. And that's usually how it happens to us, right? We need to read and discuss something several times until we really change our ways, because he was a follower of the laws, right? He was not someone that was doing something wrongly because he wanted. He was trying to be a good person. And it takes us some time to challenge our beliefs and to be able to really change our way of seeing things. But there's a few things here that I think that are very nice and very beautiful, right? So the first thing is when Jesus says, I always prefer to believe in the good. That's a decision, right? It's a decision to believe in the good. And nowadays we read so much about being positive, the power of positive thinking, the power of being optimistic versus the power of being pessimistic and only seeing the wrong things, and how that impacts our lives and the energies that it creates around us. So a lot of religions, beliefs, and even non-religious people talk about this. And I think that's very it's very beautiful and teaches us something here, that we need to look for the best in people, right? That's a decision that we need to make at every moment. So when someone does something wrong, let's believe that they did the best they could. That even though they might be doing something because they want to do the wrong thing, it's because they yet don't know the truth, right? They yet don't know a better way, or they think that that's the best way, either because they don't know really, or because they are hurt. Because happy people want other people to be happy around them. However, suffering people sometimes want to share their suffering because they want help, or because they have like this hatred, this like feeling of retribution on life, like why I'm going through that. So I want to share that with other people so they suffer as much as me. And when you see, like on Sunday we are studying the influence of spirits, right, on incarnate beings, and we see that that's the answer that the spirits gives us. So they want us to suffer as they do. When the bad spirits influence us to do bad things. That's the idea. But let's see what Jesus says here, because that's very, very beautiful and powerful. It's poetic to think about it. But so remember the core seed that contains a divine germ that one day will rise from the bosom of the earth to receive a luminous kiss from the sun. And he's coming back to what he said in the previous paragraph. One day, all strongholds of evil will fall so that God may shine in the spirits of its children. And Jesus is bringing here what he said in other moments with other words as everything that I do, you can do and much more. So we are all co-creators, right, as we study in Spiritism. We know that we are co-creators in a lower level because we are still children, we are still learning. But at some point, all of us, not only the ones that are here trying to do better, trying to study, to learn, but everyone outside, everyone that do good or bad things, So all the politicians, all the criminals, everyone that we look and point fingers to, not saying that politicians are all bad, but just giving examples of people that we point fingers and we think that they are bad, that they are doing something that, because they want to do that, right? That they have no conscience. No, all of us will be this flower that will receive a kiss from the sun, so from God, and the light of God will shine in all of us. So all of us one day will be like Jesus. We'll be helping our brothers and sisters to evolve. That's what we will do, right? And so just talking about the crowd, I want to bring three aspects for us to think about this lesson. So there was a study, I will not go very deep into this, but I want to mention because I think that's interesting. So there was a study from Stanley Milgram after the Second World War in 1947 that he had a question, right? So his motivation was the following. He was thinking, okay, so Germany is a population that had a lot of intellectual merits already. So they had a lot of education. So why did they let themselves be motivated and moved with the Nazi movement, right? So why did the people there let the government or the army or everything like that move them to do things that were so bad as we look for today, as we look back? And he had a theory. He did an experiment in which he discovered that 2/3 of the people that were being evaluated there could do similar things. So they were basically following orders, a figure of from a figure of power and that took responsibility over the actions, and because of that they followed the rules, right? So similar to the Jews at the time that were following the judges of the law. So they were the reference at the time. They said this is right and everyone followed that, right? And they kind of didn't have any responsibility for that. And this study was made here in the US. So the question was, could Americans do the same as what happened there? And what he discovered is that it could happen. So it can happen to any one of us. And he basically defined two states, right? One state is the agentic state, in which people don't take responsibility over their actions and they follow kind of blindly, although they can be reluctant, they can complain, but they will follow and they don't think that they have responsibility over what's going on. And another state, which is the autonomous state, in which people direct their own actions and they take responsibility over the results, right? And I'm bringing that because we need to be really careful when we are in a group to not be a crowd like this, right? To keep ourselves in this autonomous state. Because studying in Spiritism, we know that we are all responsible for our actions in a group or outside, right? And I want to bring that point to social media because a lot of times we share things, we generate like this fake news movement that we see a lot today without even judging what's that and without thinking what's the impact of these things, right? Because maybe there's someone that's depressed, that's already sad, that is suffering their lives. We share something, they see that and they can react, and we are responsible for that, right? We're responsible for what we create in other lives in this sense. So that's the first aspect. The second one is the individual. So now that we are autonomous, let's think about what we can take from this. Someone read this passage of the Spirit's book, please? Sure.
Where is God's law written? The conscience. Since humans carry God's law in their conscience, why does it have to be revealed to them? They have forgotten and disregarded it, but God has willed for them to remember it.
Thank you. Can you read this one as well?
Is murder a crime in God's sight? Yes, a great crime, because those who take the life of another fellow being thereby cut short a life of expiation or mission, hence the evil.
So, of course, there's a lot that we can talk about here, about individuals, but I'm bringing what I thought that was the most related to this specific passage, right? So, the first thing, of course, that we know is the laws of God are written in our conscience. And sometimes, while incarnate, we might forget that. Our cultural aspects, the teachings we have, and the situations in life can interfere with that. Somehow we always have that seed of God's laws, and we always have the conscience as a compass that shows us what's right and wrong. That's why when we do some things in life, even not knowing that they are completely wrong or something like that, we feel that we did something that maybe, we feel uncertain, right? We feel like, maybe that was not the best, I don't feel okay with that, and maybe it's not at the specific moment that we take the actions, it's later on in life, it's when we look back to that. And that's why we had Moses first, and thinking about this Christian, the Christian timeline here. But of course, you know that all of the different religions, they bring different aspects of that. So we had Moses, Jesus, and then we had Spiritism. That's how we see the three revelations in Spiritism, right? So just all of these teachings and everyone that can bring any good moral aspect that calls us to think about our actions. And in the question 747, when Kardec asked about if murder is a crime, it's very interesting, and we need to think about two aspects here. We are in a world that we know that's a world of trials and expiations, right? So either people here are reincarnating because they have a mission, and if we kill someone that's on a mission, we will impact everyone that would be positively affected by that mission. And if we take a life of someone that's here expiating, we might be cutting short their chance of recover, of heal, of repair that they did in the past. So I will talk about justice at the end of the lecture, but it's just bringing that importance that we need to respect God's will, in a sense that there's a balance in everything on the universe. There's a providence that's taking care of all of these actions, all of these loans that people get, and we need to look at everything with more responsibility in this sense, right? And bringing this idea of the eternal spirit, because the life of this given individual is not going to end at the end of the physical life. They'll keep going. And if they don't have the opportunity to recover something now, they'll need to recover that later. And the third aspect here to this passage is the disciples, right? And I would put us in the individuals, in the crowd, and in the disciples, but today I would like to think more about in the disciples' point of view, because we are here studying the words of Jesus as these disciples did, right? We are trying to see the more open comments from, or the more open questions that he answered. And the disciples, as I said before, they are sheep. They are not the shepherd. The shepherd is Jesus. So they were from people at the time. And because of that, they questioned so much, as we saw. Like John was asking and asking and asking, as we do a lot of times in our life, right? And in chapter 10 from the Gospel, Blessed are the Merciful, is a chapter of the Gospel that that comments on the message, right? The item 13. And basically, it brings for us two things to think about that I think that it summarizes this passage, which is the maximum makes indulgence a duty, for there is no one who does not need indulgence in return. So all of us have our mistakes. All of us are here to learn. We're one group in the same level. So if we didn't commit a mistake today, we will commit one tomorrow. And we will need forgiveness the same way as we should forgive others, right? And of course, there's a difference, and I mentioned that before, I'm just going to expand it now. There's a difference between pointing a finger to someone to condemn the person and trying to help someone, right? Which is different. So some of us here are parents. I'm not. Some of you here are parents. And when you reprimand or when you show something from your kid, is because you want them to grow. You want them to learn something. You want to help them for love, right? And every time we, out of the parents' scope now, taking for the society as a group, right? We also need to help others, right? We do, but we first need to help ourselves. We need to work on ourselves, and we can't point a finger. We can't be harsher with people than with what we are with ourselves. Harsher with ourselves than what, because we usually are harsher than what's needed to right? We need to work and not really look to us and say, oh, I did that wrong or that wrong, that was terrible. That's not the idea. But we need to differentiate when we are commenting on something because we have the true feeling, the true intention of help versus when we want to point to criticize someone, to put them down, so maybe we can feel better. And then to wrap that idea is the maximum of Jesus, do unto others what we would like to do unto you, right? We need to always thinking about this and take that to our heart. But let's see the second part now is another passage from John chapter 5, item 1 and onwards, in which Jesus is on Jerusalem. So someone wants to read it? Sure.
A Saturday in Jerusalem. The Messiah arrived on a Saturday under strict surveillance of the rigorously observant spirits of his time. There were many paralytics who surrounded him, anxious for the benefit of his saving grace. Shocking to fanatics, the Master healed and consoled the journey of redemption. Explaining that the Sabbath was made for people and not people for the Sabbath, he smilingly faced the concerns of the most demanding critics. Seeing so many blind and lame cowered along the passage, James questioned, Master, being that God is so merciful, why does he punish his children with such horrible defects and diseases?
And I think that that's a question that is common for us to think about, right? So when you see, I mean, especially when we can't find the answers for that people are suffering, because sometimes we look and we say, yeah, I mean, they're suffering because they did something wrong. They made a bad decision. They took a wrong choice, and now they are here in this situation, so they deserve it. And another time, not that this is right, we know that, but sometimes we can see in this life the reason. Other times we look and say, why that person was born this way? Why kids are born with diseases? What's going on there? Why is justice here? How God can be just and good if that's going on, right? And so James asked that question. And what Jesus says as an answer? Oh, let's look here.
James, do you believe, replied Jesus, that God in all his wisdom and love would lower himself to punish his own children? The Father has a plan with respect to the whole creation, but within that plan, every being plays a part in the building, for which they will be held accountable. Abandoning the divine work to live at the mercy of one's own whims, the soul creates for oneself the corresponding situation, working to reintegrate itself into the divine plan, after having been carried away by ill-fated suggestions which are contrary to its own peace.
Okay. So I think that the point for us to think about here, there's a few things to discuss, but to start with, how would God lower himself to punish his own children? And because of the language, right? But how would God lower itself? I think it would be better. But to punish his own children. The idea is that God, and we see in the Spiritist book, in the first question, what is God? God is the supreme intelligence and the first cause of all things, right? And when we see also in this chapter, when it talks about the features or the characteristics of God, we see that God is all merciful, all loving, and all justice, right? So how could he reduce himself to our level to come here and punish others, right? That's not the idea. That's a completely wrong thing. And the idea here is that God has a plan for all of us. And when you think about a path, think about a GPS, right? We make our path on the GPS. We know that we need to get to somewhere. The GPS gives us this path. And we take a lot of wrong entrances, and we take way longer to get there. But basically, the idea of punishment, and I think that I want to construct that idea with you here tonight, and not talk about punishment, talk about suffering for now, right? But let's try to get that to learning opportunities later as we continue discussing, which is, if we get the wrong path, we need to get back to the right path, right? So it's going to take longer. And that's when the GPS will say, boop, recalculating. something like that. So we need to have something on for us that will show, hey, get back to route. You're out of the route. You're going away from where you should go. And that's kind of the idea. And what happens is that we build these situations to ourselves, either because we build it in the current life or because we built in the previous life and now we are dealing with the situation, right?
In the company of James and John, the Lord walked to the temple where one of the paralytic men whom he had healed reported the incident, full of awe, full of heartfelt joy. Jesus approached him, making clear to his disciples that he wished to confirm the teachings about sin and punishment. He openly said, as we read the Gospel of John, "See, you are all well again. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you."
Right. So here comes a call that we see, right? That is, a lot of times, as we know, we come with limitations in life. That's something that we study in Spiritism, right? We study that some of the diseases, some of the limitations that we have might be, not might be, they are to help us to go to the right path again. Either because we need to expiate that because we did something wrong and we need to go back to balance in this sense, or because we are going to a trial and we need to see how we deal with that limitation, right? And a lot of the diseases we have, if we look to the conditions that our body shows to us in this life, right? All of us have different bodies with different conditions. All of us suffering from different things. And when we look to these things, not with not questioning why do I have this, thinking that we are victims here, that have a body that has a defect or something. But what can I learn with that? Why do I have this situation? What did I do? Did I do something to deserve this in this life? Can my behavior lead me to have this given situation or not? And what can I learn with that, right? When we do this, we can find a lot of answers to our things, to our problems, to our questions. And most of the times, we can deal with it better after, right? We overcome these situations not because we will get limitations. So maybe I have a stomach problem. Maybe I'll not get rid of this stomach problem. And maybe I can deal with it better. And then I can educate myself. Maybe I have a stomach problem because I eat too much, because I don't pay attention to what I eat. And that reminds me that I need to pay attention to my body, to take care of my body, because it's my instrument of evolution as well. And so basically we create that. But let's explore that a little further now. Bring that to the gospel, right? So in chapter 5, blessed are the afflicted. On item 4 and later on item 5. On item 4, there's a distinction that I explained in item 5. So basically, there are two types of afflictions. Some that have their cause in the current, in the present life, and others that came from outside of it. And our way to deal with both of those, and to try to avoid more things, more suffering, more opportunities to learn from the current life, is basically working on our moral and intellectual improvement, right? And what I want now is for us to stop looking so much at the sin and start looking at the punishment and opportunity of evolution, right? So in chapter 5, blessed are the afflicted, still on item 22, we will see about voluntary suffering, right? And what we see here is that, on the other hand, how many will those who know how to be content with what they have spare themselves, those who behold without envy what they do not have, and who do not try to appear to be what they are not. So how many times in life we look to the situation? So here the number, whatever this is, some think that's a 6, some think that's a 9. And we don't have this optimistic look, this good way of looking to it and saying, oh, that's what I have. What can I do with that? Do I need more than this? Do I need less than this? And I think that especially in a world as today, that everyone needs to be happy all the time, need to be successful, need to not have problems. And with social media, as I said before, but with the relationships that we have, that people just share what's good about their life, we look to these things and sometimes we create a lot of false needs for us. So we look to this and we say, oh, that person has a given car, I need that car. Oh, but I have a car. A car moves me around. It's comfortable. No, but I need that other car. And then I start working harder for that. And then when I don't get it, I frustrate myself because maybe I had other challenge. Or no, I need to be in X company because that company is much better than mine. Or no, they have more perks at work. Or maybe, oh, that family, that person has a much better family because it has a bunch of kids. I don't have any kids. Or no, that person speaks very well, very clearly, and I don't do that, and they are more intelligent. So there are all sorts of things that we can be creating for ourselves that maybe is not what we need. And we are just creating new and new needs and demanding from ourselves, maybe things that deviate us from the path that we need to go through, right? And one thing that the gospel says is maybe instead of looking just to what's above, in a sense, right? So if you decide one of these scales, just think about money, right? It's an easy example for everyone, I think. So when I look to that, I can say, oh, there's a lot of people that are richer than me, that have more things than me because they have more money, right? But there's a lot of people that also have less money, that have less opportunities, that can do less things. Maybe they can't travel, they can't study, they don't have good work or whatever. So when we start looking to these things, we put ourselves in a situation that we look down, not in a sense because we feel better than them, because we think that we are better, but we look to our lives and say, yeah, we have a good life. We have a lot of things. Maybe it's not the life that, like as a reference on society today says, but it's the life, for sure, is the best life that I have to teach me what I need to learn at this moment, right? And when doing that, actually, we can change for instead of complaining, for sharing. Because when we look to these people that have less than us, then we can share with them. We can extend our hands and help. And then we will see charity. What's the true charity? It's giving love, it's giving our time, it's donating ourselves. Not just money. Money is good, of course, but like it's not just that. It's sharing. And then we will go back to what Jesus said before, what I mentioned before actually, which is like we will help others to grow with us, right? And not thinking only about physical things, thinking about moral, about spiritual teachings as well. We all here know a lot, so we can go and share that with other people that might be going through a suffering and don't understand why. They don't have an answer in what they know. And what the gospel puts is we are in a world that's a world of trials and expiations, as I said a few times already. Right? So we will not have true happiness here. This happiness that all the time we feel like this bliss of happiness is not going to happen. We have ups and downs in our lives. And true happiness in a world of trials and expiations is having serenity, is having peace of mind, is being able to look and say, yeah, I'm doing the best I can. Is looking to people we love and say, yeah, I'm doing the best I can. It's having this capability of lay down in bed at night and sleep calmly. Right? So that's what we should target for. And so how can we achieve that? Can someone read this for me, please? Someone else? No.
Could humans always overcome their evil tendencies through their own efforts? Yes, and sometimes with very little effort. What they lack is willpower. How few of you make such an effort, however?
Thank you. And the answer here is very, very direct, right? Can we overcome our difficulties? Yes. You just need to have willpower. And so when I was studying, I saw like one of the notes was that we know today that there are drugs and that cause like a physical dependency and all of these things. And that was one of the comments that I saw. And at the time, maybe Kardec didn't have those. So when he asked the question, the answer, no, the answer is direct. It doesn't mean that's immediate here. It doesn't mean that whatever we want to do, we will improve immediately. It means that if we put ourselves to work towards that, we will get there. We will overcome our difficulties and we can. So even with substance that can impact our physical aspects in life, we also can these situations, right? As we have several examples of this. I just wanted to say that as well. So can you continue reading?
Can humans find in spirits an effective aid to help them overcome their passions? If you sincerely pray to God and your guardian angel, good spirits will certainly come to your aid. That is their mission.
So it's good that we opened the study tonight talking about prayer because it directly connects to this part. So we made mistakes, right? We sinned, so we deviated from what is our plan to what like is right for everyone to do. We acknowledge the situation and we don't want to do it anymore. And we can overcome, but how can we get the help? Through prayer, right? Through meditation, through doing something that's better, through changing our vibrations. That's what we study all the time. But basically, the point is because as we see in Spiritism, we always have our guardian angel, there's a divine providence, there's the planning for incarnation, so we never cannot come. If something is too heavy for us, what do we see in the Spiritism when we study it? We see that sometimes our free will is limited, so we cannot choose everything we want to go through because we can't. That's difficult. So let's do less. And sometimes the plans, they are adjusted during the route and saying, oh, so you would do all of this. No, that's going to be too difficult. You're going to fail. So let's do less, but let's succeed in something so we all can succeed. And we also have help. No one of us is alone. Of course, we have our material friends extending to family, friends, all relationships we have. But there's people incarnate that can help us all the time. But there's also the discarnate, and they offer their help to us. Not because they are bigger than God, just to make a connection to other religions, right? So we are always praying to God. And if God allows that, the good spirits that they represent the will of God, they will help us. And they will let us do it. And we will receive help to overcome the situation. That doesn't mean that we will get healed from the diseases we have. It doesn't mean that the situation will change completely. It means that we will succeed with that trial or that expiation, right? Because a lot of times we expect everything from water to wine. I mean, we still need to be in that situation to go through that. Maybe being poor in my life is going to help. Have different opportunities. Maybe being rich is going to help me. So all of these opportunities in life, they are opportunities to learn, are opportunities for growth, not for punishment. It's not for punish us. And going to the conclusion of the lecture today, I want to, other than these two passages that Humberto de Campos extends with lights, with new interactions that are not in the gospel, he also mentions a few things about the evolution of justice, right? Which is the teachings of Jesus at the time, they brought a new thought that came gradually to dominate the spirit of the world. In a sense that basically before, in the time of Jesus, if you look to the Roman Empire, to justice and how things worked, right? If you had a servant in your home that basically was a slave, and they did something wrong, you could just kill them at the moment. You could just punish them and their families. You could just like take them to the lions or something like that, right? To the Coliseum for leisure of everyone, because it was allowed at the time. Something that today we look to it and we know that that's not right. As a society, we don't feel that these things are correct. And with that, we can see an evolution. But all of this came from this idea of Jesus, of loving one another, of helping others to grow, of giving an opportunity for people to improve themselves. And as a society today, we feel obliged to help people. So today, they are not, so, and that's, there's a few outliers here, of course, because the world is very vast, it's very different, there are different cultures, right? But overall, the idea is not anymore to punish the person that did something wrong. It's to try to rehabilitate that individual and bring it back to society. So it can turn themselves into another individual that gives back to society, that helps, that's a member of society, right? And one thing that we see that's directly related to that lesson is that the death sentence is in most places around the world, right? We still have a few places that still believe on that and that still do these things. And even here in the US, we have a few states that still accept that. But being spiritists, we need to look to that with different eyes, right? We know that the spirit will not change because it died, not be outside of society, will not be secluded and be removed. No, it's going to need to come back to improve, right? So we keep that in mind. And so it's beautiful to see how in modern society, these principles of magnanimity, directly because people are aware of these things, the teachings of Jesus or of any other religion, in our context here of Jesus, or indirectly because they follow without even knowing that there was an impact on the laws, on the justice system that came from these teachings back then. And one thing that's very interesting that Haroldo Dutra Dias, which is a judge in Brazil, is a Brazilian speaker, right? That he brings up. That's a challenge for the justice system, is that the judges, while applying the law, they need to pay a lot of care and attention to not sin when they are too critic or when they are judging too drastically, you know, or like that. And basically what he calls for us to think about is that we are not judging individuals, we are judging the processes, right? So if we need to improve something, is we need to improve our processes so we can help the individuals. So if we see something wrong in how things are judged or the systems, we need to try to improve these systems. We need to improve how we live as a society and not look to one person and say that person did that wrong because of X, Y, and Z. So just in the closing remarks now, can someone read that for us? Aqui, sure. Yeah, our official reader.
What would be the character of those who practice justice in its purity? They would be truly just and would be following Jesus' example because they would practice both charity and love towards their neighbor, without which there is no real justice.
Yeah. Can you read this as well, please?
Yeah. What is the true meaning of the word charity as Jesus understood it? Benevolence towards everyone, indulgence towards the imperfections of others, and forgiveness for offenses.
And by now, probably everyone is thinking about this, but when we go back to the Spiritist book, to the Gospels, the mentions of justice, they are always related to love, right? And when we check the third part of the Spiritist book that talks about the moral laws, when you see on chapter 11, is the law of justice, love, and charity. It's not the law of justice. It's just law of justice, love, and charity. And we need to think about this. Because when Jesus said that the love covers a multitude of sins, the idea is that love is the only thing that will heal us, that will bring us together and will make us improve as a society, right? So when we think about justice, we need to take the difference into account, right? We need to forgive others. And something very interesting that we see and that I wanted to bring, because I think that all of this that I'm saying, we're talking about Jesus. And of course, there are several religions that are Christian, so they believe in Jesus. But there are several others that don't believe. And that doesn't matter. Because when we take a look at the golden rule, which basically every religion says in a different way, some religions, they are positive, like Christianism, and some others, they are negative. So they say what you cannot do, some say how we should behave. Basically, that's the idea. We will see that do to others what you want them to do to you. Right? And that basically summarizes the whole law of Moses. And what we see is that that's very interesting because it happens in every religion. And 143 leaders from different religions and 200 scientists, I think that they met in 93 and made a declaration towards global ethics in which they go over several characteristics for us to have global peace. That's the idea. They bring that I think that's very, very interesting for us is that they say that there will be peace on earth when there is peace among world religions. So not only individuals, but religions, beliefs, systems, countries, and everything, right? So I just wanted to close with that. Thank you, and let's think about these things and bring it for our lives.